Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. If you're new here, my name's Emily and today I want to share a VR to Kasia at Tarot Map and Patrick at The Living Wheel, and it is the hashtag formative decks. So these are the decks that have been really key for me in learning the tarot and my development and understanding of the tarot. And a lot of these decks came into my collection at similar points in time. They opened doors for me and new ways of reading the tarot and looking at the tarot and deciphering meanings, and just built layers of understanding really, and helped me to develop my practice and my reading. So with the decks that I'm going to mention, there are a few that I can't exactly remember what came first, so I'm just going to go through them in my memory. What I can imagine is the order. But we'll start from the beginning. My first exposure to tarot, other than seeing it in films, was when I was about 17, and I'd already been practicing witchcraft for a few years. I came to learn about Wicca and witchcraft when I was about 11 and started practicing and dabbling and reading whatever I could get my hands on and such. So I knew about tarot in that way, but I'd never really had an opportunity to get my hands on a tarot deck. But when I was about 17, I was in a used bookshop, secondhand bookshop, and I saw a tarot book and I picked that up and I read it, and then I got myself a deck of cards to go with, and so I was reading and playing and just trying things out really. So the first deck I ever got was this deck, and it is the original Rider-Waite tarot deck, and I think in my mind, because the book that I'd read had probably mentioned that getting this deck would be the easiest to learn from, is why I picked this one up. I have this deck in a little bag. I got this tarot bag from Etsy at some point years ago. These are the backs, so the rows, and this is a deck I think that people talk about as not having the best line work and colouring. I'm learning about the history of each deck as it was published and the different types, etc. But this was formative for me because it was my first deck and it was my first introduction to these cards. And you can see how it's a very yellow card, and I know that puts some people off, but I still really like this. But actually, looking at the line work, you can see the line work really isn't as good. So now I have my Centennial. So this is the original, this is the Centennial, and you can see the difference in the line work there and in the colouring, and the quality of the Centennial is just so much better. I really like to look at the Magician card actually to figure out which version is which, because I think with the table and the colours that you can see and the details on the robes, I think you can tell more easily which version you've got. So the Centennial is much better, and so it is my preferred deck now, but this was my first deck and so my formative deck. And for me, I've said this before, but for me, these images, they seemed already to have a place in my psyche, in my mind, in my head, and I seem to have an emotive kind of connection to some of these cards from the get-go. At that time, I'd just moved to a new village with my parents, and I went to the Baptist church there. And so when I was about 19, I think I got rid of my witchy books and I got rid of my tarot deck, which is something that I'm kind of sad about now, because this is the same deck, but it's not the exact same copy. But I came back. So in adulthood, coming back to, you know, tarot and to magic, to witchcraft, sort of in line with my kids being born essentially, and tapping back into spirituality and me again, and it's like coming home. And I have shared a VR to Kellyanne Maddox's Happy Witch tag, where I talk a bit more about that and my practice and those things. In fact, in quite a few of my videos I talk a little bit about that, so that's kind of my background. So then I worked with the Rider-Waite mostly for several years. So the Rider-Waite Smith was my primary introduction and sort of my building blocks. It's how I learnt tarot, it's what I studied with and what I used for daily draws for a very long time, and for several years that was my only deck. And it's only recently that I've picked up even the Centennial, so it was this deck first for a very, very long time. I think one of the second decks I got, other than some Oracle decks, which were mostly goddess decks in the beginning, the first independent tarot deck definitely I got was the Moonshot Tarot, and I've talked about my relationship to this deck as well, because I do have a very deep and profound connection to the imagery in this deck. These are the backs. It's a very well loved deck, photo collage, and very, very beautiful deck, illustrated by Danielle Noel. The illustrator also did the illustrations for the Work Your Light Oracle and the Star Child Tarot as well. this tarot resonates for me the most. I don't think this is the best for beginners, but for looking at cards in a different way and, you know, experiencing, stepping into, for path working, dream work, those kinds of more spiritual, perhaps even like new agey kind of practices, this was a beautiful, beautiful deck. And also a lot of people really enjoy the way this looks as well. So for reading for others, it's quite nice as well. And for a long time I did daily draws with this, and I built up a connection with this doing spreads as well. And I have a deep connection to this deck. So for me, this was formative because it opened doors to like new terrain to traverse within the tarot, new ways to look at the cards and the card meanings, new ways to sort of step into the world of tarot and how that can look, really experiencing more of a spiritual kind of celestial side of it. And it is quite new agey in its nature, and of course it's very beautiful. But yeah, this was the first independent deck, so it was my first taste of buying a deck that was very expensive and with the card stock as well, really different. So this was my first kind of taste of an independent deck and just something completely different outside of the Rider-Waite-Smith, but still based on the meanings mostly. The next deck that was really formative for me was this Doreen Virtue Goddess Guidance Oracle, and this isn't available anymore, and I still really, really like this. Obviously, Doreen Virtue, or how I've heard her referred to, she who must not be named, is a problematic character these days, and, you know, whether I'd buy this again now, probably not, but I still keep it and I still like it. It sometimes feels a bit jarring because the artists are different, but when I was first learning about different goddesses from different pantheons, this was a great like sort of taster, and I love the gilding, but this isn't like the most high quality deck, but it's a sort of classical kind of Doreen Virtue deck. And you know, at the time I loved this deck. It was beautiful, and it also helped me to learn. Yeah, I don't use this anymore really. I would use this for people if they wanted me to. To be honest, I'm probably just keeping this because I think my daughter might enjoy it. Backs are really pretty actually. I don't use this anymore at all. I don't believe that the Morrigan is actually in this deck either. It was a pretty deck at the time, and I definitely got some value out of it in the beginning, and often actually I will say there were times when this came through with some fantastic meanings and helped to clarify readings as well. When I was looking for sort of guidance from a divine feminine, for instance, there are keywords like Sekhmet's keyword is be strong, and you are stronger than you think you are, and your strength assures a happy outcome. So those are really nice messages. So for that reason it is a nice deck, and I do think that my daughter will probably enjoy this when she's a little bit older. So I think I'll hang on to this for her. I have another Doreen Virtue deck that she has, which is a unicorn deck, which she really does enjoy. So yeah, I think I'll hang on to this anyway for her, and it's nice to have now it's out of print as well. Next up is the Shadowscapes Tarot, which I haven't used recently, but I did use for a long, long time, and I love this deck so much. I will say, obviously, because the art is so small, it does sometimes impact on the ease of the reading, but you know, if you can get it up close, that's really nice. I did edge mine as well in silver. It's just such a beautiful deck. It's so watery and airy, and yeah, I just think it's so immersive, these images. They are so beautiful and powerful. There's so much elemental and fey energy in this. It's just stunning. I really, really enjoy this deck, and I think if they were to bring this out in a larger cardstock with like no borders, I think it would be fantastic. It would just show off the art so beautifully, and I would definitely pick that up. It is a stunning, stunning deck. In fact, I think I might take this out and work with it again. Its energy is beautiful. It's got really peaceful energy as well, which I really enjoyed. So I think reading for others would be really, really beautiful, especially someone who's kind of quite spiritual already or very arty. I think they'd really enjoy these depictions. I think maybe what I might do is try this reading for my friends and see how they enjoy the artwork. But yeah, this is a beautiful, beautiful deck, and was really... It was a formative deck for me in that it again showed different depictions, but it was a different style of art, and every deck I feel adds layers in terms of meaning and depictions and the way that the card makes you feel as well, the way the art makes you feel, and sometimes they just sing, and this is one of those decks that did that. It's just beautiful. Next up is a deck that I wanted to bond with more than I did. I don't know if I've given it quite enough of a chance. It's the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. I thought the art for this was spectacular, and I wanted it so much for a while. And when I eventually got it, I was so confused by it because it was so different. And that, I think, was another point where I learned more about the nuances of how a tarot deck can be and how it can deviate from a traditional system, whether that be the Rider-Waite-Smith or the Golden Dawn or the Thoth or the Marseille. I really love the art, but I always had to use the guidebook with this deck because I never got quite used to it. But this deck really did help me to memorize the elemental glyphs. It's very otherworldly. There's something about it as well that just feels very transformative. I think this is a fantastic deck actually for shadow work, partly because the book is so depthy. There are some cards that have like 4 pages worth of information and they really go into depth. There's keywords, key phrases, meanings, and then the past, the present, the future, meanings, and then potential blockages. So it's a really in-depth, meaty book. I mean, you can see this is a fantastic deck, and it's one I would really like to dive deeper with. As I said, my bond with it isn't so strong because I never got close enough with it. This is a deck I would definitely like to build more of a connection with, but it was absolutely formative in terms of showing me more and developing my style of reading more, helping me to do shadow work. This was probably the first deck I had that allowed me to do shadow work in that way and self-development work. And so for that, it's a really, really special, beautiful deck, powerful deck for me. It's immense. It's like a world of its own. It's a very powerful deck. Next up is the Onejj Swiss, and they just say tarot cards. I'd never seen a deck like this before, and I picked mine up from eBay and I edged it. I just loved the way that this looked. I didn't really feel like the traditional Marseilles resonated with me, at least at that point. So this was my first experience of a Marseille deck. I still think it's absolutely stunning. I really, really love this. And this is still really the only Marseille in my collection, actually, at present. It is something that I'm still deciding on in terms of what Marseille I want to go for, because I would like to learn Marseille. At the moment, I'm focusing more on Thoth. I thought at the beginning of the year I was going to be focusing more on Lenormand, but I've actually switched it around and I'm focusing my studies more on Thoth first because it's what I feel more aligned with. I said in my New Year video, kind of like plans for the year, that I wanted to just be very intuitive about it. So I made that decision that I was going to focus more on Thoth first. So within the next few years, I would like to go deeper into studies with Marseille. But for now, this is my only representative of a Marseille deck in my collection. And I would like to deepen my understanding and knowledge and potentially read my first Marseille book this year to understand it more and then go from there, really. So for now though, this is my only real Marseille deck, and it was formative in that it was the first, and it was a discovery really about the history and how older decks looked. You know, it's all about learning and developing, and I think that this is a formative deck for that reason, and it will continue to be formative for me as I actually learn Marseille. Next up is a Morrigan Grie, and this is a vintage copy. My mother-in-law had a vintage copy of the Morrigan Grie, and it made me want a vintage copy as well. And this is a deck that she learnt with when she was younger. So it inspired me, and I like the imagery, I like the close-up nature of the imagery. I feel like you get up close and personal with the characters. I like the sort of 70s vibe of it. Kind of reminds me a little bit of those like old cartoons, like Camelot cartoons, and sort of some old animations. Not Disney as such, but you know, those sorts of adventurous animations for kids. Also based on the Rider-Waite-Smith though, so fairly simple to read with, and just again opening up new ways of reading, new ways of looking at cards, and depth of understanding of cards and tarot in general and the history of tarot, and you know, looking at how the symbolism can be, you know, transferred into a different kind of tarot deck. And this devil card is so beautiful, actually. It's stunning. So I love this deck, and it's definitely formative in that way and very special to me. Another formative deck for me has been the Celtic Tree Oracle by Sherilyn Hidalgo. This deck was my first kind of introduction to the OM. I bought this deck before I had any OM staves, and it was really helpful in learning about the different trees and the energies and the different OM sigils represented by each tree, and beautiful art. So I use this more for study, but I also liked to use these cards on my altar space for each season. But this is definitely formative in that it was my first experience of the OM. It's beautiful, beautiful deck. The light seers for me, I talk about this in pretty much every video, so I'm not going to labour too long on this deck, but this was one of the first decks other than the Rider-Waite-Smith to become like a main deck for me and to be such a hard workout for me. Every kind of reading, any kind of reading, for anyone, about anything, you know, this deck can do it all, and this deck does it with style and grace and elegance, and it's gentle but it's also honest and it's real and it feels very modern and bohemian, and it has that vibe which is just gorgeous. There is a lot of body beautiful kind of figures in this, which I'm not so crazy about, but there is diversity in it, of course, and there is also some age diversity as well, which is very important. I think it's a fantastic deck. It's probably one of the most hardworking decks in my collection, so it's absolutely formative. Another one I talk about a lot is the Deviant Moon, and again, that I won't labour over for too long, but this is one that for ages I didn't think I would like or get along with, but it just seduced me, I guess, slowly. It was a slow burner, and it's all the things, you know. It's gentle, it's comforting, but it's also confronting in many ways, and it can do so much in terms of transformational shadow work, self-development work, growth, exploration, unpacking trauma, all of those things. Anything sticky that needs to be unpacked, this can do it. And like I said in a recent video, this will hold space for you and it will not judge you. It is absolutely a staple deck, and it is a formative deck. It is one of my favourite decks ever and will always be. Yeah, this is such an important deck for me, and also this would be one that I would replace as well immediately. In my VR to Papa Squirrel, this was one that I mentioned as well because I couldn't be away from this deck for very long at all. Next up is the Work Your Light Oracle by Rebecca Campbell and artwork by Danielle Knoll. So the same illustrator who did the Moonshot Tarot and the Starshard Tarot. I showed the Moonchild earlier. So the artwork in here really goes beautifully. Pairing them is just fantastic. This is such a spiritual kind of light workery deck. I mean, work the light, it stands to reason. Look at the backs. They're just beautiful. This is such an elegant, sophisticated, stunning, beautiful deck, and I think it pairs so beautifully with tarot. The messages are really expansive and inspiring and empowering, and that's, I think, really beautiful when you're sort of new to Oracle, and also, you know, something to hold you. So this deck is one of those decks that I really like to pull out for other people as well. If I'm doing a reading and we want like a clarifying card, it's a beautiful deck for that. So this is definitely a formative deck. It was one of the first Oracle decks I got, and really powerful, really fantastic. Definitely a workhorse in my collection, and just stunning. I mean, goodness. And the fact that it's mass market is so easily available and very inexpensive. Definitely, if you're new to Tarot or an Oracle and you haven't got this deck, I think it is a beautiful deck that's just like a bit of an all-rounder, really. And I think there's something for everyone in this deck. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful deck. Very hardworking. The Celtic Wisdom Tarot is one that came into my life because I was working with the Morrigan and I stumbled upon the images online, and I knew that I needed to work with it, and it was out of print. So I searched for it on eBay and found it and got it. I accidentally got 2 copies of the book because first I bought the book and thought it had the deck, only had the book. So I have 2 copies of the book. So if anyone needs a copy of the book, let me know. But this is just such an incredible deck. This is a formative deck, and it is one of my favourite decks. This is one of those very special soul connection decks. It is different, it's got a different system, it draws upon Irish and Welsh mythology and depicts a different myth and different person from each myth, and that's related to obviously the card in question, and the suits are changed, so they are all slightly different, but it is just a beautiful, beautiful deck for working with the energies. So this was a formative deck in that it was so different, but also that it opened up ways to learn about more of the stories and the legends and the myths and the tales, and to get to know a little bit about the ways in which those stories were told as well, and to learn about the Celts in general, specifically Welsh and Irish in here. And yeah, it's a powerful deck, it's a beautiful deck, so really, really formative for me. Another Morrigan deck, and actually other than the Oracle that I made, which I showed in my last video, my VR to Papa Squirrel, this was a deck I made using found art and channeled with the Morrigan and keywords and such. Other than this deck, the first deck that I got that was Morrigan themed was the Morrigan Oracle, and this is by Morpheus Ravenna and Hannah Storyteller. I have the book by Morpheus Ravenna and the Great Queen, which is the best book I've ever read about the Morrigan. It is academically sound, it's got so much in it in terms of educational content as well as reconstructionist content, and it is just a fantastic resource. So I cannot recommend that enough. And this deck is fantastic for communing with the Morrigan and for messages and for using with certain decks as well. This is powerful, this deck. This does not pussyfoot around, this deck. And so I really recommend this deck if you are working with the Morrigan, walking with the Morrigan. It's just, yeah, I get goosebumps when I use this deck. It's very powerful. I mean, look at that lack. I've got goosebumps right now. Oh my gosh. So this deck was not easy to get. This was on drive-through cards. I believe it is still available, but with shipping it wasn't the cheapest, but it also wasn't the most expensive, but it was absolutely vital for me to have this deck. I also edged mine. It's a powerful, powerful deck, and it's actually one that I probably would replace. So now if I was redoing that VR, I would include this as well, because it is so formative for me in terms of my veneration and honouring the Morrigan, working with the Morrigan, walking alongside the Morrigan and understanding what it is that she needs me to do. Yeah, really powerful, really, really potent. I would absolutely highly recommend this to anyone who's working with the Morrigan or looking to work with the Morrigan or to learn about the Morrigan. Absolutely fantastic deck, and the book as well. Next up, the Thoth. I am currently studying the Thoth Tarot. I'm reading Lon Milo DeQuette's book. I'm really enjoying it. I actually didn't think I'd enjoy it so much. I'm like whizzing through it a lot faster than I thought I would. This is the version with the gilding, because I love gilding, and I fell in love with this deck after watching some of Mag's Woodland Hags videos, who sadly now no longer has her channel, and then discovering Lennon Smith, watching her videos. I knew I needed this deck, and I just picked up straight away, to be honest. I couldn't not have this deck in my life. It's the art that does it for me, absolutely. You know, I'm not a massive fan of Aleister Crowley, but I can absolutely work with and love this deck. This is just a stunning deck. So I'm learning so much about the symbolism in this deck and about the different meanings and how it relates to the Tree of Life, and it's just so fascinating, and I'm absolutely falling in love with this deck. The more and more I learn about it, the more and more I love it, and it's a formative deck in that, again, it's a completely different system, and it helped me to learn about the origins of the Rider-Waite-Smith as well, and Arthur Edward Waite and where he came from in the Golden Dawn, and it opened up those areas of study for me. So for me, this is absolutely formative, and I think this is going to become a lifelong love and relationship. Like this deck, I've been working with it slowly since I got it, and I love it more and more the more I learn about it and discover about it and work with it. I love working with it, and when I first started working with it, I worked with it very intuitively. I did an interview with it, I worked with it intuitively, used the books that I had, and you know, studied it when I did the reading, and it read beautifully, absolutely beautifully. I just cannot wait to get deeper and deeper and understand more and more and learn more and more and read more and more. I'm getting kind of obsessed with it. So yeah, this is formative and will continue to be formative as I move through and learn more and develop and understand. I mean, one day I think I'd quite like to offer readings with this deck as well. At the moment, I'm definitely a Rider-Waite-Smith girl, and I probably always will be a Rider-Waite-Smith girl at heart, and I do want to have a tarot business, and I do want to offer readings. So when I first start offering readings, I will be starting with Rider-Waite-Smith decks and clones and that system, but one day I would like to offer readings with this deck as well, I think, because of the connection that I'm building with it. It feels like it would be natural, but that would be in years down the line, I think. So next up is the Wildwood Tarot, and this was a deck that I ummed and ahed over for a long time. I had the Druidcraft for a long time before I got this deck, but for me, this deck was something else. You know, there's some kind of connection I had with this deck, and I don't know if it's the art or the actual depictions or the energy that I felt with this deck, or the readings. The readings were spectacular, to be fair. The book is so special, and I know this is a slightly different system as well. Things are switched up. There's something about this though, that it feels like it has the essence of nature, in that it is cruel and kind at the same time, and absolutely like Mother Nature at its core. You know, there's something so primal and visceral about this deck, and I think that's what the connection is. I still want to get deeper with this deck though, and I think I would like to study this deck specifically. An area of study that I'd like to go deeper into with this deck. It's becoming more and more special the more I use it. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful deck. Oh my gosh. So yeah, for me, again, this was a completely different way to look at the tarot, and it offered me a different perspective somehow, and intensified a connection to Earth and I could never have predicted that I would become so close to this deck actually. And it's so funny, isn't it? Some of the decks that you're not sure about, sometimes those can become the ones you're most bonded to. So that is that for me. The next formative deck for me was the Tarot of the She. This was a deck that really heightened my understanding and knowledge about the Fae, because it was the first deck that I felt really kind of depicted the energies, how I could feel them. They weren't just these little beautiful creatures with wings. As much as I love the other fairy decks that I have, this was the first deck that felt so raw and potent and visceral and authentic. And I think it was a real eye-opener actually. Again, the suits are different and it's just got so many layers and depth of meaning. There's something quite Deviant Moonish about some of the faces, and they can be a little bit frightening, but also, oops, dropsies. Hey. Also vastly expansive, absolutely. And for that reason, it opened up like new layers of meaning again, more meaning, and really beautiful for like shadow work, self-development work, facing those inner shadows, and also inner child work as well. There was something very magical and dreamlike about this. I think using this for dream work is just fantastic. Really potent, powerful. Look at that web of mirrors. This is a beautiful deck for shadow work. So again, just a really introspective, personal kind of deck, and the relationship I built with this was fantastic. I really enjoyed working with this deck actually. I'm going to pull it out again soon because it's been a while since I have used it. It's a fabulous, fabulous deck. And if you work with Fae energy or elementals, then this is a fantastic tarot deck to pick up. The Philarquost Tarot is a deck that I adored for a very long time before I even picked it up, and it has fast become one of my favourite decks in my collection. It is such a powerful deck for me. I've grown to have a deep appreciation and a deep reverence and respect for this deck. It is so powerful and potent and intense. So many layers of meaning to draw from this, and I use this in my Compassion Challenge VR to Sadhana. It's just beautiful. I love the art, and I think it, again, it opens up new layers of meaning. There's something very transformative. I feel like this is very shamanic, very intense and otherworldly. So for me, this deck is absolutely a must in my collection. There's something so powerful and potent and beautiful about this deck. I love it. That's the High Priestess. Stunning. The Herbcraft Tarot is another really formative deck because I'd never had a deck that felt as practical as this in that way, and that I could actually use for spell work. And so I use this really quite often, and not always in a divinatory way, and it's so beautiful to actually use with other tarot decks as well, and to get layers of meaning. And I use this with the Hedgewitch Botanical Oracle, and there's so much to pull out of this in terms of like herb lore, herbcraft, as well as tarot understanding and meaning, and the illustrations are just beautiful. I think that this deck is so unique and individual and special, and absolutely it is a formative deck, and it will continue to be really important and special in my collection. It's another one that I would repurchase immediately if it disappeared. The Marianne is another one that I mentioned quite a lot, especially recently. It's quite new in my collection. This deck is formative because it is unlike any other deck, and it is a hard hitter. It is powerful, it is potent, it really uncovers truths that sometimes you don't want to be uncovered and you don't want to see, and it speaks wisdom in a nourishing way. There's old worldly wisdom, there's this like ancestral connection with this deck as well. It's very potent, very powerful. It's becoming a real workhorse in my collection actually, and this is something I just deeply connect to on a very profound level and spiritual level actually with the artwork. I'm looking forward to going deeper and diving deep into studying with this deck, so reading the book is on my list to do as well as soon as I can. A deck I picked up this year is the Visconti de Modrone Tarot, and this is the museum quality low scarabeo tarot deck of the Renaissance courts, and I'd been looking for a historical deck for a while. I watched lots of videos and tried to figure out what would be the best one for me to have. I wanted one that was a beautiful reproduction that had been reworked really beautifully, and the gilding on this just cinched it. Like, oh, I've not actually worked with this in a divinatory way. I've just studied the cards really. It's absolutely beautiful. I just marvel at the art, and I think it's really helped me to learn more about the origins of tarot and the history of tarot, and deepen an understanding and a respect and reverence for the tarot. So yeah, this is beautiful. The cards are so big as well that I'm not so sure I would want to read with this. Maybe I will one day, but at the moment it is just a kind of study deck and something to enjoy and marvel at. It is absolutely a really special deck. Stunning deck. So that pretty much brings me to the end of my VR to Kasia from Tarot Map and Patrick from The Living Wheel. I've really enjoyed this hashtag. It's been so much fun. I think it actually aligns really beautifully with some of the other hashtags that are going around at the moment, and it's really nice to start thinking about our journeys in tarot and what we connect with and how, and our relationships to the decks, and I love doing that. I find it so fascinating. So I've really enjoyed watching the VRs to this as well. If you've done one as well, let me know, and if you'd like to do one, I definitely would. I'd love to see it, so let me know if you do decide to do one. If you enjoyed the video, then please do give me a like and click the thumbs up button. Comment below if you've got any comments or questions or thoughts or experiences you'd like to share. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're new to the channel, you've not yet subscribed, then please do think about subscribing. I create content around magic, witchcraft, tarot, and spiritual practices. So if you'd like to see more from me along those lines, then please do think about subscribing. And while you're subscribing, don't forget to hit that little bell notification, because that's what's going to let you know when I create and upload videos just like this one. With all of that said, thank you again so much for joining me. I hope that you stay well and safe. Thank you again to Kasia and Patrick at The Living Wheel for this wonderful hashtag. I hope you stay well and safe, and I look forward to seeing you in another video really soon. Take care. Bye. Mwah.